Nearly every game released now has a multiplayer aspect to it. Many games are built entirely around multiplayer in fact, and have little to no single player mode at all. Games such as Left 4 Dead for example, which uses very bad bots to simulate having actual friends. Shooters go back a long way, back before I was born in fact. But at what point did the first modern multiplayer shooter really occur? At which point did we leave the idea that shooters were a single player experience, with multiplayer just being an added bonus? In my opinion, this occurred in 1996, with the release of id Software's next generation shooter, Quake. Quake was a sort of sequel to Doom, but not quite. It's set in a hellish universe with lots of weird and wonderful weapons, and as much 90s video game gore as an American video game developer could get away with, which, as it turns out, is quite a lot. Quake features a few major improvements over the Doom series though. Firstly, the protagonist is voiced by none other than 9 Inch Nails' frontman, Trent Reznor. Second, the soundtrack for the game was entirely composed by none other than 9 Inch Nails frontman, Trent Reznor. Thirdly, the nail gun and super nail guns are loaded with 9 Inch Nails, ammo for which can be found in crates of 9 Inch Nails, featuring the 9 Inch Nails logo. I'm starting to wonder if I enjoy Quake more for the gameplay or the soundtrack. No matter, because most people enjoy it for the multiplayer. When it was released, Quake was a popular choice for LAN parties. Many internet cafes ran Quake, or one of its many multiplayer mods. Quake had a huge impact on the way PC gamers thought about multiplayer. While console peasants were tied to their sofas, with their unnecessarily short controller cables barely making it as far as their PlayStation or Nintendo 64, PC gamers were able to play with as many people as the server could manage, either in the same room or across the world. While Quake wasn't the first to have online multiplayer, it was definitely one of the first to gain the social status that we now commonly associate with an esport. The next game to really gain similar status, being popular in internet cafes, was CounterStrike, a mod for the original Half-Life. Half-Life uses the Gold Source engine, which just so happens to be a modified by Valve version of, you guessed it, the Quake engine. However, CounterStrike had one major flaw: no 9 Inch Nails soundtrack. Before there was Counter-Strike Global Offensive, there was Counter-Strike Source. Source was intended to be a port of Counter-Strike 1.6 from Gold Source to Source. Of course, 1.6 was a standalone release of the original Half-Life mod. Valve, seemingly unintentionally, did a pretty good job of dividing the community. While most players were happy with 1.6 as a standalone port of the original mod, Source didn't gain quite the same popularity. Many players, including pros, refused to adopt the almost but not quite remake of their beloved 1.6. Valve had a weird way of dealing with the divided community. Having players split between the two versions of the game, they decided to release a third game in the form of Global Offensive. In many ways, Global Offensive was just Valve having another crack at Source. Eventually, after a shaky start, all pros agreed to switch to Global Offensive as the primary Counter-Strike game. However, some casual players, particularly in Eastern Europe, still refused to switch to CSGO, and continue playing their favourite shooter from the late 90s as what I've always assumed to be some bizarre act of rebellion. But what do I know? I wasn't old enough to play 1.6 when it came out. In fact, I wasn't even into shooters at all until I played Global Offensive. And even then, it took my friends a lot of persuasion to get me to play it with them. When I first played it, I didn't even enjoy it that much. It wasn't until I got to around 150 or so hours in the game that I really started to get into it. Until Global Offensive, the only other multiplayer shooters I played was Quake Live and Call of Duty World at War, both of which are good games, but they didn't hold my interest for that long. I probably played less than 10 hours in both of them combined. Counter-Strike wasn't the only game that was born out of Quake. I mentioned earlier that there are many multiplayer mods that exist for Quake. One such mod was named Team Fortress. You may have seen Team Fortress Classic on Steam. Team Fortress Classic has a similar story to Counter-Strike 1.6. The makers of Team Fortress were hired by Valve to make a port of their mod to the Half-Life engine. It was then released bundled in a big box with Half-Life. the 2 expansions, Blue Shift and Opposing Force, and CS 1.6. I assume it was also released as a standalone game, but I have the big box bundle. It's very interesting to think about how many of Valve games spawned from mods. I quite like their strategy in the late 90s of picking up talented fans of their existing games to work on new ones. I think when you create a mod, you're an active part of the game's community. You think to yourself, this game is fantastic. You know what would make it even cooler? Bombs and AK-47s. I think it's great that Valve is starting to involve the community again in CSGO with the new beta branch. Hopefully, this will lead to some changes we all want to see. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm currently working on another video about 144Hz monitors. Some people thought that perhaps there should have been more of a difference than I concluded, and I had just gone about testing it the wrong way, so I'll be revisiting that soon. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see that. If not, no matter, I'm sure I'll see you around. Bye bye!